Hello students, I am Dr. L.K. Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS, IIT Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. Today in this lecture, we are going to discuss something that is both contemporary, the medieval as well as ancient, and we hope that it is also going to remain in the future. So, we will discuss about the relationship between religion, society and the state. Now, the reason I said that this is a very critical question in contemporary India is because the way religion, society and state defines itself in the Indian context, as well as the way it has been defined by our political leaders, the way it has been defined by our constitution makers, the way it has been defined by scholars, as well as the way people define religion, society and state in their day-to-day lives is quite significant. So, unless and until we look at it from the perspective of sociology, from the perspective of political sociology, it will remain something that an enigma. And when it remains an enigma, it is our duty to uncouple it as well as to look at what constitutes religion, what constitutes society and what constitutes a state and the different relationships between them from a political sociological perspective. So, this is not a class or lecture of theory, this is not a class of theology, or this is not a class in which we are going to have general discussion on it. We will be very specific how theoretically we can look at these three interconnections. The key question that we are going to discuss today is how do religion and politics co-produce modern identities. In the previous class, we had discussed about community, we had discussed about identity, and we had also discussed about ethnicity. So, in this class, as well as in the following lectures, over the past 4 lectures, we are going to, in the next 4 lectures, we are going to discuss each one of them in more detail. So, now when you look at religion, state and society, many a times scholars have tried to make a distinction between what they call as secularization and secularism through its historical narrative. So, what does this mean? What is the difference between secularism and secularization? So, in a very general sense, if we understand its history, it started in the West, particularly in the 17th century at the end of 30 Years' War. So, what happened during that period? There was a challenge and fight between the church and the state, or the religious church or theological church and the secular state. But the church itself had an overpowering impact on the social, moral as well as political life of Europe. The church or the Catholic Church would appoint the kings, they would appoint who can be the next king, and they would also decide both the legal cases as well as the theological cases. So, this 30 Years' War created a rupture, and this rupture made it very significant as to mark a delimitation on churches not only property ownership, but what it can decide and what it cannot be decided. So, in essence, the 17th century is a very significant timeline in our understanding of Western notion of secularization and secularism. The French Revolution of 1779 furthered this moral value and furthered this disjuncture. How? By creating something called a secular state and a religious church. And church cannot have any impact on how the state is run, because the state as a secular institution would work for the people and be elected by the people. So, there is no justification of the divine right of the kings, If you remember your French Revolution, during French Revolution, the revolutionaries had dethroned the king and his family and executed them. So they would not like to come back to the same situation in which one person can claim that he has a divine right to rule. He is not obliged, he is not answerable to the people. He is only answerable to God and the representatives of God in the form of the Pope or the clergy. And through this Pope and clergy, the king himself became a representative of the God himself. So, if you read French history of that period, when the king was residing in the palace of Versailles on the outskirts of Paris, his entire retinue, his entire day-to-day lives became a part of spectacle, became part of divine being. So, how he gets up, what he does after he gets up, his entire daily routine, everything was for spectacle. People were out there to see how he is doing it. It's almost like our temples, churches, gurudwaras, and so on and so forth, in which the gods are made to get up in the morning. They have their rituals, they bathe, and then the entire retinue of activities they move on till they go back to their bed at the daybreak or at the end of the day. So this way, what we see is that French Revolution was a clear-cut break between the two, between the church and the state. Now, the president of France was not a divinely ordained or divine sent representative. Rather, he is a representative of the people. So, religion became subordinated to region. And French Revolution for the first time also spoke about liberty, equality and fraternity. Even if you want to be the president, or even if you are the president or the leader of the country, still you cannot be placed at a higher pedestal except the position itself than everyone else. Once you are out of that position, you are like a normal citizen or a common citizen. But it was only in around 1851 of the 19th century that Holyoake coined the term secularism, and he argues that secularism is to serve the humanity. So he is also following the enlightenment goals of the reason, rationality and humanity over religious beliefs and religious values. The same thing was done by Peter Berger, who argues that secularization needs to be removed from religious control. And we don't even need to understand secularization vis-a-vis religion or theology. Rather, we need to understand how the people live in their daily lives, what are their beliefs, what are not their beliefs, how these beliefs are constructed, and how through ages we can deconstruct some of these beliefs and create new constructions. Similarly, classical theorists like Weber and Durkheim also looked at the secularization in terms of rationalization. Basically, they are looking at why people believe in what they believe. If I believe in something, there must be a certain reason, because beliefs can also be properly described, properly understood through the process of causality. Like the ancient Indian philosophy of where there is fire or where there is smoke, there must be fire. So, if something is associated with belief, that means there must be a reason for that. And what are the causes for it and what after effects do we see? We will discuss a little bit about the how Weber and Durkheim have understood it in a later moment. So, in the Western societies, particularly in the modern West, we see a separation between religion and politics or religion and the state in the name of secularism. But India did not follow this suit. So, we will come to the Indian case in a moment. Now, In terms of theories of secularization, we have three dominant theories. First is modernization theory, second is world system theory, and third is critical theory. Modernization theory, as I said, speaks about religion as a primordial relationship, and they would argue that once modernization happens, once people get more educated, once their occupation is not linked to their religious beliefs or their status in society, the and they move to more urban locations, they get acquainted with science and technology, they would eventually place religion at the back burner, because religion is something that is for the people who are not reasonable or who do not have modern knowledge or are not part of modern education systems. So once they have it, then these individuals can themselves explain every aspect of their lives or everything that is around them through the causality. For example, why earthquake happens? Is it because the god is mad at you, or is it because it happens because of the tectonic shift? Why do we get measles? Is it because some goddess is angry, or it is another disease? So these are the very foundational ways through which modernization theory wanted to explain the day-to-day lives of people and what is happening with them. And when you give knowledge or causal effect oriented knowledge to individuals, to people, that means they understand what they need to do. And once they understand what is required to be done, they can do it without resorting to the religious beliefs or without going to any clergy to get the things done. Second comes as world system theory. World system theory has not spoken a lot about secularization and secularism, but whatever they have spoken at the level of global dependency, in terms of that certain regions are more religious than others, because these regions are backward or these regions are in the periphery or semi-periphery, and there is an economic dependency between the core and the periphery. And when this core and periphery meet each other, the core always claims to be secular and its orientation, because it is more educated, it is more civilized or so-called civilized, as well as it has created a system in which its own beliefs are always better than the other two, and the ones who are at the extreme periphery, they happen to be the most religious ones. Critical theory of Habermas looks at religion from the perspective of a general protest against technical reason. So in a way, we can see critical theory as a critique of modernization theory of Weber, Berger and others. Why? Because what the stage of enlightenment or age of enlightenment told us was that with modernization, with rationalization, with reason, religion will vanish. But if you look at the case of United States, the most powerful country in the world, most of the institutions of higher technical knowledge, higher social knowledge, higher theological knowledge are stationed there. The society is highly educated, it's also highly technology oriented, but it's one of the most religious countries in the globe. So how do you bring these two together? So Habermas claims that there must be, or religiosity in US must be a challenge to the way European Enlightenment created certain ideas of reason, rationality and significant difference between religion and the state. Even if you look at the currency notes of United States or the dollar bills, it's written "In God we believe" or "In God we trust." So even if you look at it at a first glance, it will be a little difficult to believe that this powerful country is speaking about God in their day-to-day lives. So we'll discuss further as to how this synchronization is happening and how this desynchronization is also happening at the same time. That is the reason why when Peter Berger moves from the classical modernization theory, he claims that we are in a phase of desecularization. That means religious institutions, religious beliefs are becoming more and more prominent. So when we say that the US is highly religious, it could be both a protest against technical reason as well as a process of desecularization, or it was never secular in the first place. That can also be argued, but that's not my opinion as of now. So the argument here through this discussion is that when we are talking about secularization as a process, we need to look at secularization not as a linear one, but as negotiated through local histories. But does that mean that when we are talking about desecularization or protest against technical reason or saying that US remains highly religious, are there watertight compartments, or we are making a mountain of a molehill? Now the argument can be, yes, we are making a mountain of the molehill, because is secularization vanishing, or is secularism vanishing, or is the challenge towards secularization, or is the challenge towards secularism? Now these are, again, as I said in the beginning of the class, these are two distinct categories. Secularization is a process through which there is a distinction between the state and the church. Now the church doesn't rule over the state. Fine. So what are the different aspects of this? One aspect is that education. When you were there in the medieval period, you were there in the ancient period, education was restricted to a few category of people. It could be the Brahmins. In the Indian context, it could be the clergy in the Western context. But one process of secularization is that irrespective of your position in society in terms of your religious beliefs, in terms of your social location, the education that you are going to get is not dependent on your caste, not dependent whether you are from a specific religion, or is not dependent on your gender. It is also not dependent whether to get certain kind of education you have to join an abbaye or become a clergy. No. Rather, what you need to do is that you get up in the morning, go to the college, go to the school, go to the university, get yourself enrolled and study. Secondly, in terms of occupation, now our occupations are not determined by our social position in terms of either religion, or in terms of our gender, or in terms of our caste. Rather, they are dependent on our ability to achieve something. All the Brahmins are not priests. They could be teachers, they could be bureaucrats, they could be hunters, they could be anything for that matter. All Shudras are not in service work. They could be any of them. And if you follow the Arya Samaj, or you know about Arya Samaj has created a number of priests who were not traditionally born in Brahmin families. In the state of Tamil Nadu, now non-Brahmins are getting educated so that they can also act as priests. So these activities, these works, or these occupations have been secularized. That means your position in society, your caste, creed doesn't define that. The Indian model of secularism is a little different from the Western model of secularism. Why? Because in India, the idea was that of principled distance, which basically means that It rejects strict Western style separation between religion and church or the religion and the state. Rather, the state maintains an equal engagement with all faiths. So, the India is not a Caliphate, it is not a Hindu Rashtra, it is not something else. Rather, we are a Republic of India, and this Republic of India has a duty to be equidistant from every religion. But equidistant does not mean complete disengagement, because our constitution makers, our freedom fighters and people even before that very clearly understood that India and Indians happen to be religious people. But the religion here is not the same as we have in the West. People are religious in their day-to-day lives, in their everyday lives, irrespective of whichever religion you are, whether you are a Hindu, whether you are Muslim, Sikh, or any other religion that you follow. From morning till night, there are certain rituals that everybody follows, and our beliefs are also entwined with our day-to-day practices. So, when this is the condition that we are living in, if we make a distinction between the state and the religious institutions, it will not work. That is one. Second aspect is that unlike Catholic Church, unlike Protestant Church in the West, Hinduism, Islam, as well as other religions that are practiced in India are not hierarchical. So, let us understand what is this hierarchy all about. So, in Catholic faith, the Pope happens to be the biggest leader or the topmost leader, and then you have bureaucratically organized different groups of churches, and these group of churches are further subdivided into many other churches, and these subdivisions have their own subdivisions till it reaches to the village level, and this goes on throughout the world. But do you ever remember any such kind of a bureaucratic organization in the Indian context? Hindus, do you think Shankaracharyas decide who is going to be the next prime minister or next chief minister? No. Or Shankaracharyas have an overwhelming power over the different temples that are there or shrines that are there in each village or in every city? The answer is no. The same thing goes with that of Islam, the same thing goes with Sikhism, the same thing goes with Buddhism, the same thing goes with Jainism. So, there is a lot more decentralization of power and autonomy among all of them. So, even if we try to make it the clear cut binary between religion and state in the Indian context, it will not work, because Indian religions are believed and practiced at a contextual level. But there are certain issues that were there, and the role of the state is to look at those issues. One issue is that of temple entry laws. So, we are a liberal state, and because we are a liberal state, so we do not, or the state does not discriminate in the name of caste. So, while temples can restrict people who are the non-Hindus to enter inside their premises, they cannot restrict people from the different castes other than Brahmins or other than Dalits or other than someone else to enter. In other words, temple entry is the clear-cutly marked for everybody. Anybody and everybody who wants to enter, they can enter inside. Second is that it also looks at the role of minorities through minority institutions, whether they are educational institutions or cultural institutions. And through the protection of these institutions, it believes that everybody needs to get a level playing field. No one religion, no one language, no one caste should be overpowering over others. Rather, we are as part of the Republic of India, we should always believe in the state or the constitution which is going to protect our rights as well as protect our duties towards the state. So, religious autonomy alongside minority rights are protected by the state through our constitution. It's also because unlike many other countries, India witnessed a horrific violence at the time of partition, in which hundreds of thousands of people died because of their own religious beliefs. So the post-independent leaders decided that we are going, even if it is not mentioned in the Constitution of India, we are going to be a secular state, and we will not let such kind of violence reoccur under our watch. If it is happening, that means we have to understand why it is happening, rather than blindly say it is happening because two religious factions are fighting against each other. So constitution is very significant in the modern society, particularly in the case of India, when we are following principled distance or equidistance. Then the final argument about Indian secularism is that it is public and communal rather than private affair. That means that we practice our religious beliefs even in the public sphere. When you put the bindi on your forehead, it is a mark of Vishnu, it's a mark of Shiva, it's a mark of being a married woman, or it's a mark of being a religious person, or you have done some religious activity. But at the same time, you can be both religious, you can be secular, you can be something else. So that way what we say is that Indian form of religious practices, Indian forms of secularism is a little messy. It's practiced in everyday lives, and we cannot make clear-cut distinctions and dichotomies between how it is done and how it is not done. Now coming to the next aspect of religion and secularism could be communalism. Now this is a very contentious and controversial topic. It is controversial because several scholars have tried to understand it from numerous points of view. Some have said that the communalism is about belief that religious groups have common secular interests. And unlike in the West, where communalism is understood as the feeling of commonness or communal feeling of commonness, in the Indian context, we mostly look at it in terms of religious divisions or caste divisions. And most often than not, researchers have argued that it is during the British colonial period and its attempts of divide and rule through separate electorates that, or appeasing one religion or making one religious group the move against another religious group, that communalism took deep roots. So when communalism took deep roots here, it was very modern and a cultivation of religious hatred. So there is nothing ancient about it. When it is not ancient and it is modern, that also means that communalism itself is modern, it's not an ancient phenomenon. And all of this we witnessed during the partisan struggles and the kind of violence that ensued during partition. Paul Brass, one of the major contributors to the idea of communalism in the northern Indian context, argues that communalism is a tool for elite competition over resources and power, which essentially means that the elites are fighting over different resources and powerful positions and institutions. So they are producing violence through by invoking primordial relationships, primordial ideas of the religion and one's belief in religion. In other words, there is a process through which the riots or communal riots are created, and it is done through the three phases of preparation, enactment and explanation. So, the riots are strategic, not spontaneous. So, it is not that two people came together and they fought against each other. It's not so simple. Rather, communalism is an instrument through which religious polarization is created, and this religious polarization benefits certain groups, whether in politics or in other domains. So, when communalism is invoked or when communalism through riots is practiced, it is for secular goals, to attain secular power. So, the enactment of religion here is a performance. The giving of speeches, slogans, is a performance, rather an actual act of religiosity or religious activity. Varshney is another key scholar who has been speaking about the civic networks and how communalism can be created and how communalism can be prevented. Why certain places have more communalism related violence, whereas other places do not have them. So, he argues that communalism is a way in which certain aspects of religious beliefs reinterpret the role of the state. First. Second, any place or any site where you have networks or organizations that are inter-ethnic and intra-ethnic, it's next to impossible to have a communal riot there, or even if a communal riot is manufactured, it will not last long. So, this in a sense means that there are clubs, there are unions in which people from different cultural, different ethnic, different religious, different caste groups are organized, and through this organization they understand each other, they are part of each other's lives. But if this is weak, that means they are all different clusters that have been formed with no intersection among themselves. That means there are very high chances that communal feelings can be manufactured here, and more polarization can be done, so that each group moves away from each other. And when each group moves away from each other, in case these three groups come from a specific religious identity or a linguistic identity or any other communal kind of identity, they are going to make this portion as other and either segregate them or remove them from this zone itself. And we have numerous examples from the colonial period as well as post-colonial period how it was done. You can read more of Varshney's works, you can read more of Gyanendra Pandey's works, Bipan Chandra's works and other works wherein they are looking at how this ideology is constructed and how this constructionist views create identity or fixated identities which are again deeply problematic and which are supportive of certain forms of communalism. Bipan Chandra, for example, that argues that communalism is a false consciousness which masks class division. The moment, according to him, the moment you start speaking about people who are at the bottom of the pyramid in class terms, or the proletariats, or the proletariats among the proletariats, or the have-nots, here their rule is challenged, because the people at the bottom, they are questioning the structure of inequalities, and once they question the structure of inequalities, they would like to reverse the order. But the ones who are at the top, or the ones from the bottom who would like to go to the top, they understand that if something like this happens, then our rule will get squandered. So, what to do? Divide people who are there at the bottom in terms of class, in terms of caste, in terms of religious identities, and then send to your people to make them fight against each other. If they are engaged among themselves in fighting, then they will never become one single unit to struggle against the top 1%, whether in terms of caste, whether in terms of class, or in any other terms for that matter. So that is why alongside Bipan Chandra, Gyanendra Pandey is also looking at the similar kind of phenomena in which some of these communal feelings are constructed, and this construction has a lot of impact in the way society gets recreated post riots, or it re-identifies its others post riots. There are also certain ways in which caste-based communalism is understood, but we have already discussed this in the previous classes, so I will not get in detail. So, in essence, what we see is that secularism and communalism, they are antagonistic to each other, but at the same time they also feed into each other. So, if secularism aims to manage diversity, communalism exploits it. Here they are adversary of each other, but their origin lies in democratic and capitalist modernity. So, they are not age old. So, secularism sometimes is carried forward by the state, communalism is also sometimes carried forward by the state. So, in an effect, if there are economic inequalities, then polarization and communalism could be created. So, once economic inequalities are taken care of, probably the communalism will not happen. But again, there are scholars who question this economic determinism, because they give examples again of United States, again of many middle class activists who are economically well balanced, well placed, but they are also part of media polarization and communalism, the various aspects of communalism. So, we need to when you are taking any of these ideas and arguments that I am presenting today to you in the form of a discussion and a debate, always understand that neither secularism nor communalism are predefined categories. They are ever evolving, and we need to understand how people practice both of them in their day-to-day lives, whether for the instrumental benefits, for secular benefits, or for something else. So, these are further readings and references that you can go through. They are extremely interesting to go read, and once you read, you will have a better understanding of how something is manufactured, how something is done, and whether communalism, secularism and other kind of isms are pre-given or are constructed for certain purposes. Thank you.